Hello everyone, my name's Ryan. I would have loved to be at the Innisfil Mental Health Summit in person to be able to see everybody face to face, but because of this COVID situation, I'm here live from my living room. So I'm going to share with you my personal experience with substance use and addiction and kind of where it led me. So let's just jump right into it. I'm going to read it off so I don't miss anything. So if you see me looking at my paper, that's why. So today I'm going to share with you my story and experience with substance use and how it evolved into me becoming dependent on them, as well as how I was able to change my life and get healthy. I will also be discussing my experience with the legal system, which I became involved with due to my bad choices and addiction. Let me start by telling you about myself. I'm 25 years old and I grew up in Barrie. I went to Innisfil High School, and growing up I was a huge sports guy. I played AAA hockey and lacrosse. I was pretty good too. Other players' parents and coaches would always tell me I have a great chance to go somewhere with hockey, but that was all taken from me due to my substance use and bad choices. Sports were a great way for me to stay in shape and have positive friends, but playing at a high level also means working out, running, and dedication. I was more into having fun and hanging out with my friends at the time, so I made the choice to quit playing, and that's been one of my biggest regrets as a young person. I have a younger brother who is 2 years younger than me, and I also have an amazing family behind me who will do anything and everything to help and support me, even now after all the pain and stress I put them through. So getting involved in drugs and eventually having an addiction, it doesn't just happen to people with troubled families or a hard life. It can happen to anyone, and when it does, it can cause a lot of pain and stress for not only yourself, but for everyone who cares about you. I really hope you can take something away from my story today, and it will leave you with a better understanding of how addiction and mental health can happen so easily. No one wants to end up becoming a drug addict and need to depend on something to get through their day. During the time I was using, I met all kinds of people who found themselves dependent on drugs to feel normal. Doctors, construction workers, retirement care workers, roofers, and even good parents. Some of these people I met started their addiction after a work injury or a car accident, and they were prescribed pain medication. When the doctor cut them off a couple months later, they would have to go to the street to find their medication or go into withdrawal, which is basically unbearable for most people without the necessary help and support. That being said, there are many ways someone can fall into addiction, so let me tell you my story. My substance use, it started around the same age when I decided to quit hockey, shortly after I got into high school. The friends I had been closest to had started smoking weed, and at first I'd be there with them while they smoked it, but I would never smoke it myself. At this point in time, I should have realized these were the kind of people I needed to separate myself from. These were the people I grew up with, and it's so difficult to just stop talking to them and cut them right out of my life. And that's a huge part of why young people make bad choices. It's the people they surround themselves with. So since I didn't separate myself and I continued to hang out with these same friends while they smoked weed, I ended up trying it, and that first puff was the beginning to a road of addiction and trouble. I began smoking marijuana every day, even at school. And it got to the point that I was dependent on it, meaning that if I didn't smoke it, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I was basically just miserable without it. My life revolved around getting stoned, and it got to the point that's all I ever wanted to do. It drove my love for sports, and especially hockey, out the window. You may have heard that marijuana is a gateway drug, or that it is addictive, and I can say in my experience that it is both of these things. So now I'm going to tell you guys about the first time I got in trouble with the police, and what I learned from it, and what I didn't learn from it. This happened just before I turned 18. I was still hanging around with the wrong people all through high school, and basically every friend I had in my life was either doing drugs or selling drugs. All my real friends that I grew up with, I stopped talking to, and I would go on drives with these other friends I had to pick up drugs, which was again a terrible choice. Throughout my speech, you're going to hear a lot about choices, because that's what life is all about. You're either going to make good choices, which will lead to happy, successful relationships, or you're going to make bad choices, which will lead to stress and pain for not only yourself, but for everyone around you. So one day I chose to go on a drive with one of my friends, and on our way home we got pulled over. The police officer immediately smelled the marijuana and took us all out of the car and handcuffed us. He explained that if someone didn't own up to the marijuana and take responsibility for it, then we would all be arrested for it and sent to jail. I figured my friend who actually got the marijuana and who it belonged to was going to own up to it and take responsibility, but he didn't. That's another good point I'd like to make, is the people you think are your friends and have your back at that age are the same people who will do whatever to protect themselves, and they don't really care what happens to anybody else. All three of us that were in the car that day were arrested for possession of marijuana for the purpose of trafficking. I spent the night in a holding cell, a small concrete room with nothing but a steel toilet and a concrete bench. I was released the next morning with a court date. This was my first experience with the court system, and I received a year of probation for being in the car that day. The problem was that I was dependent on the marijuana at this point, so I just continued to smoke it. The problem with the situation was that I basically got a slap on the wrist, and I didn't learn anything from it. Looking back, I wish I was forced to see a counselor or something like that, but I wasn't. My parents did try to get me to see a counselor, but I had an attitude that they had no control over. I had no interest in talking to someone I didn't know, and I didn't see smoking weed as a problem at the time, so I refused to go. This whole situation didn't make me scared of getting in trouble. Instead, now that I went through it, I felt like if it happened again, it wouldn't be a big deal. So it's safe to say I wasn't thinking very clearly at that time. As I came to the end of my high school career, I did manage to graduate with some help from a great teacher who saw potential in me. I started working full-time right out of high school at a pool place, installing swimming pools. It was a very hard physical job with a lot of heavy lifting and long hours in the heat. I was on a 6-man crew at this company, and every member of the 6-man crew was using drugs. So my tolerance with smoking marijuana every day for the last 3 or 4 years got so high that the marijuana would barely do anything for me anymore, no matter how much I smoked. And I want to remind you once again that I did not have a bad life. I have a great family. I was a popular guy. I was generally happy all the time with no depression. There was nothing I was trying to forget about or escape from by using drugs. It basically just came down to making terrible choices and surrounding myself with the wrong people. The drugs my coworkers were taking were painkillers, otherwise known as opiates. Opiates are a class of drugs that are highly addictive and very dangerous. They include heroin, fentanyl, and pain relievers such as Oxycontin, Vicodin, codeine, morphine, and many others that are available with a prescription from your doctor. So my coworkers would tell me they take these drugs because it helps them work and takes away all their pain from the heavy lifting and pushing a wheelbarrow all day. After a couple weeks of watching them take the pills around me, I was the only person who wasn't, so I was feeling pressured to try it. When I did, the feeling was nothing I ever experienced before, and I ended up liking it, especially just because it made work so much better at the time. So I continued to take these pills a few more times, and before I knew it, they were starting to replace my addiction to marijuana. Just as a quick note too, this was a form of peer pressure for me. None of my coworkers ever offered me these drugs or tried to influence me to take them, but me just being around these people and watching these people take these drugs every day made me curious enough to wonder why they liked it so much. Why do they want to take these drugs every day? So me just putting myself in the position to be around these people while they're using drugs around me, that was enough peer pressure for me to want to try it. So just always be aware who you're around, and somebody doesn't necessarily have to offer you something for it to be peer pressure. You just being around it is enough peer pressure to make you maybe want to try it one day. So when I started taking the opiates, I had no knowledge about what they do or how addictive they can be. I was taking them every day, and if I didn't take one day, I would get extremely sick. That's something my coworkers didn't tell me when they offered me the drugs, was how addictive these opiates are and how dependent you become on them. It's a deadly cycle of needing the drugs to go to work, but needing to work to afford the drugs. If I couldn't manage to get any pills for the day, I wouldn't be able to go to work or even leave my bed. What happens is you start to get withdrawals once you stop taking the drug. When that happens, you begin vomiting, you get diarrhea, hot and cold sweats, and you're also not able to sit still. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, not even my worst enemy. It's awful. When you're addicted to opiates, your life consistently revolves around them. You start to worry if you have enough money left before payday, or you're always thinking about when you should take your next pill, or if you can even get any more, because maybe your dealer ran out. My family did not know anything about this either. I was able to keep this a complete secret for years. Opiates are not like marijuana, where your eyes get red or glazed over. It's not obvious to someone when you're under the influence of opiates if you're using them on a daily basis. So this lifestyle went on for a couple years while I was building pools, and it continued into other jobs. I did try a few times on my own to get off the drugs, and I was successful, but only for a short period of time. One example is when I was carpooling with someone at work who had past addiction problems too. It didn't take long for the both of us to get back into the substance use. And like I said earlier, it all goes back to choices. I'd make a bad choice and then I'd be right back into it. And I can't begin to explain to you guys, once you're into this life, how hard it is to get out. My tolerance had built up to the oxys, and now they weren't doing much for me anymore. Same thing with the marijuana. So now I made the terrible choice to go and try something stronger. I knew some of my other friends who were using heroin at the time, so I asked to try it. My addiction went from taking an oxy pill every day to sniffing lines of heroin every day. I began to replace the oxys with heroin altogether, and that was my new drug of choice. Once I started using heroin, my addiction was costing me like $100 to $150 a day, which is more than I made in a day. I had my own apartment, and I couldn't afford my rent, my bills, and I'd always be out of money. I was constantly lying to my parents, making up excuses to get money from them, and they'd always give it to me. The point I'm trying to get across is that this all stemmed from my marijuana use in high school and evolved into a heroin addiction. I have what you would call an addictive personality. Anything that I like, I can't get enough of. An addictive personality is what someone has that causes them to be more likely to become addicted to something. This can include someone becoming extremely passionate about something and developing an obsession. Some examples of this may include junk food, video games, or drug use. When we find ourselves overindulging in them, it usually stems from anxiety, depression, and poor impulse control. So some indicators of an addictive personality are comfort eating or binge eating, using alcohol to socialize or relax, checking one's phone or social media too much, impulse buys, excessive shopping, gambling, just obsessing in general, excessive risk-taking, drug use for coping, and never feeling satisfied or needing more of a particular feeling. So in my case, I always had a problem with my impulse control. Anything that I liked, I couldn't get enough of, especially when it came to video games. So when I was around like 15, anytime I wasn't at school, I'd be on the video games. At the time, I didn't see it as a problem, but looking back, it definitely was. I would avoid spending time with my family and friends, I wouldn't finish my homework on time, and I wasn't performing in sports as well as I used to. My change in behavior was causing a lot of friction between my parents and I. They saw my interests changing and tried to get me to go back on the right track, but I thought I knew what was best, and I refused to listen. I see now that they were only wanting what's best for me. This was all due to my addictive personality and not being able to get these video games off my mind. I know some of you probably play a lot of video games, and just notice if you start putting these video games before important things in your life, like your goals or your family or your schoolwork, and this could be an indicator that you need to take a break for a little while. This type of behavior may cause you to one day become more easily addicted to something worse like drugs or alcohol. I am grateful to have my family and friends supporting me because without help and support, addiction is also almost impossible to beat on your own. Even though I made some terrible choices when I was younger, I've always had a good heart. Even through all the drug use, I never stole from anybody, and I was never a violent person at all. After a few years of using, I knew my lifestyle surrounding drugs was getting worse and worse, and everything happened so fast, I didn't even realize how bad into it I was. Then an incident happened on October 1st, 2016 that's changed my life forever. So I was still involved with the wrong people all through high school, and basically every friend I had in my life was doing drugs or selling drugs. So at the time, a friend of mine asked me to get them drugs, which I did. I met up with them, and I gave them the wrong bag of drugs by accident, a different drug than what they asked for. This resulted in my friend getting hurt. Opiates are a very dangerous drug. If you've never taken them before, it can be deadly. Luckily, everyone was okay, but because of my bad state of mind, my addiction, and other things, I made a terrible mistake, and a friend of mine was hurt. So it's been a devastating lesson. The police traced the drugs back to me, and I turned myself in the next day. I was arrested and held in penitentiary jail overnight, and I was granted bail and given very strict rules where I couldn't leave my house without my parents unless I was going directly to and from work. Again, thank God I have the supportive family I do, because without them, I wouldn't have got the opportunity to change my life and get healthy. That terrible situation has given me a purpose. The seriousness of it, the fact that a friend of mine was hurt, that was the wake-up call I needed. I've now made a commitment to change my life and to help others either change their life or to convince them not to get involved in this crazy world in the first place. I've not touched any drugs since the day of my arrest, and I'm proud to tell you I'm 3.5 years clean. After almost 2 years of being on bail with these very strict rules, the court proceedings were finally over. On February 7th, 2019, I was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and began my journey through the justice system. I started my sentence in penitentiary jail, and after 2 weeks, I was transferred to an institution called Joyceville Medium Security in Kingston. I was there for 8 months. Joyceville is a very big institution, and the unit I lived on, I shared with 40 other men. During my time in Joyceville, I didn't get into any trouble. I was working in the kitchen, and I was following my correctional plan and attending programs. So this allowed me to be transferred to a minimum security prison called Beaver Creek, which is in Gravenhurst. I spent 3 months there. At the end of the 3 months, I had the opportunity to go in front of the parole board and see if I could be released back into the community early. I was fortunate enough to be granted parole, and I was released to live back with my parents after serving 1 year. During my parole hearing, they looked at my charges, my behavior while in prison, and my community support. I'm now on parole for the next 2 years, which means even though I'm back at home, I still have rules I must follow. During my time in prison, I met all kinds of people, and to my surprise, they were just like me. They also had a good upbringing. They were very nice, caring people, and they were involved in sports. Some of these people have been in prison for over 15 years and still have no idea when they'll be getting out. Most of these people aren't bad people at all. They made one bad choice one day, and for the rest of their life, they've had to live with the consequences of that choice. Therefore, I say over and over again, your life is all about choices. You can make one bad choice and your life could end up a completely different way than you could ever imagine. And I've seen living proof of it. Prison is a very stressful place that no one wants to be. While in prison, you have no control of anything. You're told when and what to eat, when you're allowed out of your cell, when you're allowed outside, what you can wear, and you have no control over who you're around or who you have to live with. At times, the prison is put on lockdown and you're not allowed out of your cell, no phone calls, can't attend programs, no showers, and this can last up to 2 weeks. The hardest thing about being in prison for me was being away from my family and loved ones. The only way I could talk to anyone was from a payphone, which costs whoever you're talking to a lot of money. I was able to get visits, but my family would have to drive 3.5 hours to Kingston to see me for a couple hours through a pane of glass and drive 3.5 hours back home. So this is just another example of how your bad choices don't only affect you, but they affect everyone around you and everyone who cares about you. As bad as the situation is, I am grateful in the way that this happened to me. It was a real eye-opener. I've completely changed my life. I've cut out every bad person in my life, and I've been clean off the drugs for 3.5 years, so I got a fresh start. I feel like I have a purpose now, and that my story can help many people, from young adults to youth and even parents. After going through this nightmare with drugs, looking back, not even realizing how quickly everything happened, I decided I want to help people who fall into addiction problems, just like I did. I'm currently working for the Canadian Mental Health Association as a peer support worker. My goal is to become an addiction counselor, just like the one I speak to, Sheldon. Sheldon also works for the Canadian Mental Health Association and was a huge piece of my recovery. I never thought that talking to someone who could relate to me and understand me would help me, but shortly after my first session, right after I got arrested, it was amazing how much talking to someone who related to me helped me. It helped me tremendously. The CMHA have been an amazing support through my entire journey, and I'm so grateful to have them in my life. They genuinely care about their clients and are a great group of people. If you guys have any problems you're going through, it doesn't have to be substance use or mental health. It could be anything. I really suggest you try to talk to a counselor. Again, I come from a great family. I was a happy person all around and really had no big problems in my life. So I want you all to understand that this doesn't only happen to people with mental health issues or people that have big problems in their life. It can happen to anybody. It's not easy to stand up in front of people and share your life story, especially when it's one of challenges. But I'm doing this hoping that it's going to help people. Even if one of you can leave here today with a better understanding of addiction and mental health, then it's been worth it to me. I've shared this story at many schools in Simcoe County and York region, and I've reached more than 2,000 students. Everyone asks great questions, and when they come up and talk to me afterwards, I can see that they're really starting to think about their choices, and that's just really satisfying to me. That's what gives me the passion to keep doing what I'm doing. There are a lot of stereotypes about what a drug addict looks like and acts like, but I'm hoping you can leave here today knowing we come in all shapes and sizes from all walks of life. We don't choose to be here, but certain choices or situations in our life put us here. I could have never imagined I would have ended up in prison in my life, and a lot of this has to do with the people I surrounded myself with, making bad choices, and wanting to fit in with my friends. What I hope you take away from my talk today is you just have to make good choices. Even just smoking weed can lead to a life of drug use. And this can happen to anybody from any kind of family or background. And no one can beat addiction without some sort of support team. If you find yourself heading in the wrong direction for any reason at all, please tell someone close to you. You can reach out to me, the CMHA, your teachers, your friends, anybody you're comfortable with to get the support you need. One of my biggest mistakes and regrets is hiding my addiction from my family. If I would have came clean with them and told them what was going on in the first place, I could have avoided all this trouble I went through, and they could have helped me just like they have. So don't be afraid to ask for help. There is an opioid crisis in Simcoe County, so we need to keep doing everything we can to start talking. Start talking means not to be afraid to open up with what's happening in your life, to not be afraid to share your story, to be willing to listen when someone starts talking, and to be ready to support them every step of the way. So never be afraid to speak. Thank you very much for being here today and being part of such an important discussion. It was my pleasure sharing this with you. I would have loved to have been able to answer any questions that you may have. What I can do is I can give you my email and you can ask me any question. There's no bad questions. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. So my email is rmcphail@cmhastarttalking.ca. So please reach out to me. I'd love to hear some feedback about what you thought. And yeah, thank you for being part of such an important discussion. Thank you.